Water, earth, fire, and air. These were the ingredients needed to make a fantasy world. But the spirit realm added something extra to the concoction. Rava. Thus, the Avatars were born. Using the power of all four elements, these beings rode the cycle of reincarnation to protect balance and keep order in the world. At least until one disappeared for a century.
Will you go penguin sledding with me?
We're doomed. This is a bit of an oddity for me, as I'm reviewing an American animated series. Thank you, Patreon-requested reviews. My set's under reconstruction. I mean, yeah, when I put in the review whatever you want me to tier on my page, I was expecting some more obscure or awful stuff. I was not expecting to be asked to cover one of the most widely acclaimed animated series of the last 20 years. I'm not complaining, I just anticipated something more in my field of expertise. Tokusatsu, RPGs, and series that bridge reality with digital existence.
You just love taking me out of my comfort zone, don't you?
Avatar: The Last Airbender was an animated series that ran on Nickelodeon from 2005 through 2008, consisting of 61 episodes split into 3 seasons. The series was created by Michael DiMartino and Brian Konietzko, apologize if I screwed up the pronunciation, and has a very serialized approach to its storytelling, with character establishment and develop happening in almost every episode. Much of it was inspired by Eastern mythology, and the series showed a depth of research into such that's just plain amazing, with the martial arts styles all being based on actual skills. It is by no means a bad series, and I'll be taking you through most of it in the following few videos, and I say most of it because there's also a post-series graphic novel, and a sequel series that carries on with the next Avatar, The Legend of Korra, neither of which I intend to talk about right now. Older fans may remember me taking a jab at Korra in the midst of my .hack videos. Mainly because, once again, I didn't care for Korra. Though, even then, I didn't find it a bad show, just not something I wanted to keep track of. And the original series was much the same way. I wasn't dedicated to seeing every episode as it aired. I caught them in my own time, and for the most part, the writing was really, really good. Better than many so-called adult programs. I've of course stated in the past my dislike for the "it's for kids" descriptor for, well, pretty much anything. As no good writer should write down to an audience in order to obtain that description. Just be aware that there are things appropriate for adults that are not for children. But a good story is good no matter the intended audience. And Avatar is one of the more significant examples of the fallacy in the "it's for kids" argument, and one that pops up every few years just to remind people to knock it off with that label and limitation to viewership. While its protagonists are kids, all of it is too maturely presented for such to stick, more feeling as a coming-of-age story. So, like most of what I review, I view it as a "it's for everyone" series that, in this case, just happens to be animated. And wise companies should be shooting for a wide demographic of people to have a big hit anyways, and that's what Avatar was. As this is a Western series, I won't be doing a big event-by-event episode breakdown for the series, more an overview of the story with my critiques and commentary coming in. Mainly because the show is easy to get, and I do that with things people are usually unfamiliar with. That, and I want to see if I can actually talk about more than 10 episodes in a single video for the first time in a few years. As the backstory for the series goes, the world is divided into 4, based on the 4 main elements, with a startling connection with the spirit world holding the various forces together, and balance maintained by an individual capable of utilizing the abilities of all sides, known as the Avatar. And The Last Airbender opens with the previous Avatar having gone missing 100 years ago.
I've still got that library book.
In the South Pole, 2 siblings, named Sokka and Katara, find a boy frozen in ice, their actions resulting in his freedom. The boy, Aang, is an airbender, an individual capable of wielding the element of wind through the use of specially trained martial arts abilities. Benders of the world are separated into divisions of wind, water, earth, and fire, with intermediary elements aligning with one of the disciplines it most closely matches. Katara herself is a waterbender, though at this stage is untrained due to the lack of those that can teach her. Aang quickly forms a friendship with the two, crushing on Katara as well, a relationship that develops over the series. However, Aang's awakening ends up being noted by a ship belonging to the Fire Nation, an industrial superpower that intends on
world domination!
And has been searching for the Avatar so as to keep them from interfering like the last Avatar, Roku, did, as such a conquest as they've executed it would upset the balance of the world.
They do not care.
This mission is helmed by Zuko, the son of Fire Lord Ozai, who was exiled for political insults against his father, which he saw as a dishonor he wanted to make up for at all costs. And Zuko's uncle, Iroh, a former general in the Fire Nation's army, that's looked after Zuko since he was forced out.
Iroh, incidentally, is one of my two favorite characters in the show, the other being Sokka. The latter as he's the tactical, witty, badass normal
Water tribe.
that always tries to make a difference, while Iroh is more the wise mentor figure doing his best to guide Zuko to a better life, one he would find fulfilling over obsessing on regaining what was taken from him. In part because he lost his own son in this war and treats Zuko the same as he would him, in part because he sees that what Zuko wants back won't get him what he really needs.
And sure enough, Aang is revealed to be the Avatar, saving the denizens of the Southern Water Tribe the hassle of being attacked by willingly going with them, only to escape, meet up with Sokka, Katara, and Aang's Sky Bison familiar Appa, and begin a quest to have Aang learn the other three element disciplines so as to truly hold the mantle of Avatar, bring balance back to the world, and save everyone from the ambitions of the Fire Nation. Only for Aang to learn that everything he had, he lost, while he slept decades away in the ice.
I slept too long!
Already from the first 3 episodes, you saw the makings of an epic in this, as it establishes a lot about the characters simply from their interactions. Aang's kindness and free spirit, Sokka's snarking and sense of duty, Katara's compassion, and Zuko his rage, frustration, and wish to return home and be accepted.
And yet, it doesn't once forget that these are kids in the roles, something that holds throughout the entire first season. They're inexperienced in the world, and the Book of Water reflects that in how it's more of an adventure than a mission, with them making a lot of side trips that serve to establish the world, show where the characters begin at, and make the mistakes anyone would if they've not had to before.
They're not adults in kids' bodies, like you'd expect from such a show weighing such responsibility upon them, but neither are they written as complete imbeciles stumbling their way through this. They're written as people! And it's frustrating that's so rare.
Hell, that weighing of adult responsibility on a kid, that's something regularly called out over the series, and not just with Aang. Though, to start with him, he had what you might call a bad reaction upon learning he was the Avatar, and his entire life was upended as the Air Temple that was his home started treating him as if he was a deity given flesh, no longer able to connect to the kids around him who viewed him above what he was before despite none of it having changed. And when they told him what he needed to do and treated him less and less like a person, he broke under the pressure and ran, like a real kid would. However, he hasn't stopped running yet, and while Aang does what he can to help people when he has the problem right in front of him, he has the bad habit of evading what needs to be done until there's no other options. A trait in part endowed onto him by his nature and training as an airbender, and also his personality that would prefer to avoid conflict and have fun. He is a kid after all. Zuko similarly is one that's bonded himself fiercely to ideals of honor, to the point that such weighs on him, the anger more born of his own perceived failings to be recognized by his father, and the quick temper as others prey on that are not so easily remedied. But the anger, as we note, never completely consumes him. If he thinks something is wrong, he'll stop himself before he goes too far, in part tempered with the wisdom provided by Iroh. The issue is, for the first season, they're in a race and political chess game with General Zhao, who interferes with Zuko's quest to capture the Avatar, as unlike Zuko, who simply sees it as a way to return home at last, Zhao sees it as a quick way to gaining power, not seeing that working with Zuko, who is a potential successor to the throne, could in fact lead him to that opportunity in time. It's, ironically, one of the main reasons why he never wins. But it's never treated as either being foolish, simply a difference in opinion on the other that makes such, from their view, unfeasible, beginning with Zhao's interrogation of Zuko's subordinates to discover the details of Aang's discovery. But with the first 3 episodes setting up the story arc for the series and its ultimate goals, this season's being reach the Northern Water Temple and the Bending Masters there, much of the season is adventurous meandering, as Aang has a list of things he wants to do across the world.
Here, we'll ride the hopping llamas. Then way over here, we'll surf on the backs of giant koi fish. Then back over here, we'll ride the hog monkeys. They don't like people riding them, but that's what makes it fun.
Which, yeah, should not be a priority. But none of the 3 really see the scope of the war Aang can turn the tide in, that the Earth Kingdom will fall within the year, and the Water Tribe are so scattered their forces are doing nothing but play support for the Earth forces, and it takes a while before they do see that picture.
And the side questing begins with the warriors of Kyoshi. While Zuko's baffled by the erraticness of Aang's journeying...
You have no idea where you're going, do you?
Well, I know it's near water.
I guess we're getting close then.
The group encountered the titular Kyoshi warriors, a group of women fighters that end up not so subtly putting Sokka in his place. The guy starts out as kind of misogynistic, but more born from traditional expectations in the Water Tribe and the limitedness of experience, as when most of his home's men left to fight, all that was left were those not trained to fight, which meant it was just him, the women, and children, so there was nothing to really break him or inform him otherwise, which is why when he gets his ass handed to him by Suki, who over time becomes his love interest, he ends up changing his ways, although with the occasional slip-up.
I would be honored if you would teach me.
Everything is different now.
See, that's the difference between an uninformed person and an ignorant one. When seen with evidence to the contrary, Sokka changed. If he was truly ignorant, he would have stayed adhering to that. The episode also establishes just how damn weird the wildlife of the world can get. And the kinds of expectations and popularity of being the Avatar is common to the people, this going initially to Aang's head with the blind acceptance, which, upon learning why he left the Air Temple in the first place, seems a bit out of character with how he goes about it to just get shallow acceptance. And as they linger too long and Zuko arrives with his forces to wreck the town, it also makes this about the duty of responsibility he's avoided, a lesson that still needs to be beat into his head for quite a long time. The King of Omashu, however, shows that not everyone from Aang's old life is gone, as after the trio end up causing damage to the city with another of Aang's fun-loving events, they meet the titular king, Bumi, who remembers Aang from their childhood.
And Bumi is a mad genius with a sense of humor. I don't touch on comedy much when I review things because, well, comedy is subjective and in part informed by culture. Though there's never been that much of a culture gap in my experience with the Japanese things I review. I just find a lot of it stupid and not well done when I do come down on it. But Avatar really does have a lot of great comedic moments, as such relies on the people stuck in situations, their personalities, and the writing of the jokes that makes it all come together, and provide levity through the series to balance out its greater drama.
Now, check this out.
In other words, that's how you should be using comedy in a dramatic show. Admittedly, there's a lot of unfunny material as well, but it's certainly the minority.
And it's also the origin of one of the series' most notorious running gags.
Oh, my cabbages! My cabbages! My cabbages! My cabbages! Ah, my cabbages!
But what I think I like about Bumi is there's a method to his madness that, while menacing, isn't malicious. Though you only see such on the rewatch as opposed to the first viewing, where his challenges posed to Aang are more games and tests of ingenuity that only a mad king, one that thinks outside of the box can devise.
Typical Airbender tactic. Avoid and evade. I'd hope the Avatar would be less predictable.
But this ends up being an important part of the character arc. The idea that there has to be a better way to solve what can be seen as impossible tasks while confronting them directly.
You must master the 4 elements and confront the Fire Lord. And when you do, I hope you will think like a mad genius.
In Imprisoned, the group comes across a village subjugated by the Fire Nation as part of their war engine, and after they encounter an Earthbender that's hiding his ability, they end up accidentally revealing them to the Overlords. No, not those Overlords. And to fix their screw-up, infiltrate the prison they've set up that holds the region's Earthbenders as prisoners of war, by pretending they are Earthbenders.
That's Lemur. He's earthbending.
Military intelligence at its finest.
But it's an idea of how bad such has gotten, that the Earth Kingdom's territory is slowly being subsumed by this industrial power, and that bending alone won't just cut it. Mainly as Earthbenders are established to not be able to bend metal due to how the ore has been processed. It creates an environment of despair for them, for a people that have so become used to being able to manipulate the ground they walk on. And with the directness inherent to the faction, they see no way out without it, and it takes one not of their nature, through Katara, to remind them of that, and the trio to give them a solution that would grant them the ability to gain their freedom and begin to fight again. But during its events, Katara loses her necklace, which is found and taken by Zuko. Episodes 7 and 8 are a two-parter that more explore Aang's duty as an avatar, and their connection to the spirit world, which grants the mystical elements of the world. Mainly because Aang's left before he could learn such from the monks, and without knowledge of all the paths open to him, he won't develop fully, and be able to mediate the crisis that comes from the two realms crossing.
We're all gonna get eaten by a spirit monster.
But, sure enough, after accidentally crossing over while trying to help another settlement, he does manage to get a clue to some answers, leading him to a temple which allows him to speak with his past life, Avatar Roku. Problem is, the temple's in the Fire Nation, which puts them at risk, when they run across a Fire Nation blockade.
What were they blockading? Why were the ships there in the first place? To pose this kind of obstacle? I seriously doubt they would be blockading the boundary line in the ocean between the Fire Nation and the Earth Kingdom, as that would warrant thousands of fully manned ships, meaning the Fire Nation has, what, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, dedicated to this war? We don't see nearly that many.
I mean, from a story point, it would make more sense if this was a fleet they just happened to cross paths with, since it is led by Zhao. It just seems like a pointless diversion from the story, as that fleet doesn't significantly hinder Zuko either, and they do face enemies at the actual temple, the sages that guard it, at least until they find one that hasn't been subsumed to the will of the Fire Lord, who ends up helping them to their goal. And Roku does not have good news, foreshadowing the final conflict of the series. Certain conditions affect the power of the various benders, and in the Firebender's case, the appearance of comets in orbit significantly amplified their powers. Sozin, the Fire Lord who began the war, used a comet to kick it off, and that same comet is making its round back, and will arrive by the end of the summer, permitting total conquest and removal of that stalemate it's currently locked in with all of them supercharged. But at least with this meeting, Aang is given a better grasp of his spirit-based abilities. He just needs to work on the rest, which has begun properly with Katara's discovery of a basic waterbending scroll in possession of a merchant, which she ends up stealing as they won't sell it. Her reason for such is pretty obvious. Jealousy at Aang's natural aptitude for bending, when she helps start him on the techniques, but almost instantly moves past her ability, despite endeavoring to become better at it for years. The theft, of course, gets them into trouble, as the merchants were pirates.
Because, of course, the merchants were pirates.
And they collude with Zuko to recover the scroll and capture Aang, which they only narrowly escape. But before the series of events ends, it does get Katara more capable in her own abilities, meaning her lack of progress before was likely from lack of confidence, as she makes massive strides in such afterwards. Jet, however, introduces an unneeded negative influence in a boy that despises the Fire Nation and has gone Children of the Corn with a group of younger kids. I say it's unneeded, as the trio had already been struggling with impulsiveness and the situations such leads them into. Sokka with the Kyoshi Warriors, Katara with the Scroll, Aang with Boomy. But with the 3 prior instances, something positive came with each consequence. So while something was being learned, the underlying mistakes weren't being corrected. And Jet played as an example of why leaving such aid unchained could have disastrous consequences. Like them, he lost his family and became resolved to fight. But instead of doing something meaningful, Jet chose to impulsively lash out however he could, weak and strong alike, until such consumed him, and he got others to follow him on such a crusade, and become as bad as those he fought against.
He's just an old man. He's Fire Nation, search him. But he's not hurting anyone. This doesn't feel right. It's what has to be done.
This kind of thinking is and always has been caustic and self-destructive, as once the line's been crossed, how the hell do you stop? Made worse by how he so easily deceives Aang and Katara, who act ridiculously naive to all of this, while Sokka very quickly catches on to it, as Jet plans to kill civilians amongst all of the soldiers, and use Katara to facilitate causing their deaths. We're never really given a good reason for their quick trust of him either, as he never comes off as that charismatic and silver-tongued, so them falling for it doesn't work for me, as the pair are normally smarter than that. Coupled with fighting ability that makes him more than a match for the group, and you have a character approaching Sasuke Uchiha levels of dick, and nothing learned at the end of the day.
Worse, the following episode is The Great Divide, which is the near universally rated worst episode of the series.
And yeah, I more or less agree with that. The group end up escorting 2 rivaling tribes of refugees through a canyon, while Katara and Sokka are in the middle of a sibling spat, the pair taking opposite sides of an argument that is over something petty started between the tribe's founders, which Aang, in trying to resolve it, trivializes such a matter by reducing it to a feud between 2 children blown out of proportion.
Though with how they give such up so easily after learning it was so trivial, after all the bile that had been slung between them all episode, to be born out of something so small? Yeah, no! Hatred of that scale needs something bigger to set it off. And in the intervening time of the feud, there would have had to be other instances that fueled such animosity that resolving just that thing should not have made them throw away. Legitimate or no, they were being sold as having irreconcilable grievances with the other, ones that made them continue it over keeping themselves safe.
And Aang's solution, telling them it was all just the antics of children, not only should that not have resolved it, but
I made the whole thing up.
Please tell me I didn't see that.
You did?
As I've not seen any media in the franchise outside of this series, bar a fair chunk of the first season of Korra, I'm curious to whether that came back to bite him later on. This is not how you resolve conflicts between people. You do so by making each side understand the other. Deceiving them to settle things isn't the way to do this.
not helped with how they designed one tribe as if they were more savage, and the other as far more cultured, unbalancing the reception of the two, and biasing the audience despite both sides' blatant, selfish hypocrisy. In fact, the more savage ones come off as the more compassionate for much of it.
And such is never called out to show them that their conflict is making both into the kind of people they despised about the other, when aside from outwardly, they had little difference. And Aang's solution, while indicative of the greater wish seen from him to avoid conflict where possible, just shows a callous disregard for such simply to bring it to an end.
And it's one of the few episodes of the show you can skip completely and lose nothing from the nuances of the story, as there's no progression to anything or callback to it later, to the point in the series recap episode The Ember Island players,
spoilers, I hate that episode,
pretty much called that out by ignoring it ever happened. Later, during a storm, Aang ends up revealing the circumstances of ending up frozen in ice, that he was running away from his responsibilities after a fissure ends up calling out his abandonment of them. And it wasn't entirely unfounded either, as a place that had been his home became stifling with the edicts from the other monks, treating him as more as a tool or a weapon than a person, the only one standing up for him being his guardian, Gyatso, who the other monks chose to remove him from.
Ironically, had they not pressured him to be the Avatar over being himself, the last 100 years wouldn't have happened, and he wouldn't have chosen to avoid that mantle.
This is counterpointed with Zuko's own backstory, of upon wanting to take more responsibility in learning the duties that would fall to him in time, he learned of and criticized a plan to use freshly recruited soldiers as nothing but cannon fodder in a battle they had no hope of winning. His calling out of the cowardice and callousness of the general behind it led to him into direct confrontation with his father, who saw such disapproval as disrespecting him, and Zuko's own refusal to fight him in the following duel as weakness he refused to tolerate, instead of the respect it was. He punished Zuko by burning his face, leaving the scar that still lasts to this day, and then shamed him with exile, when he did nothing wrong. It's an important dichotomy, both for Zuko and the Fire Nation. They're stamping on weakness as it's the mandate of those above them, throwing away lives for meaningless conquests, and Zuko trying to live by his father's standards is far more self-sabotaging than anything, a behavior Iroh's been seeking to show him isn't the way. But the storm results in both Katara and Sokka getting severely sick, necessitating Aang's search for medicine to help them, but ends up captured by Zhao as they're in a Fire Nation-controlled region. It's only because of the interference of Zuko, disguised as the titular Blue Spirit.
This series is very basic and direct in its titling of things. This joke works better if you actually have a kettle.
Anyways, together they manage to escape. After all, as long as Aang's free, he'll have another chance to catch him. But if another manages it first, he'll be forever exiled. Forever alone.
Forever alone, I want to be forever alone.
But what this episode ended up doing was whetting our appetites for the two working together more down the line with how they fight their way out. For if Zuko's father, Ozai, is dethroned, he could go back home, and Aang is the best way to defeat him.
Granted, Zuko doesn't see that as an option for him right now, as more than anything else, that would be a betrayal of his family and country, a more significant dishonor than the supposed disrespect he showed in the past, as it would be an intentional choice to turn against them.
While that changes down the line, and Aang does learn of Zuko's identity, sharing a wish for them to be friends over enemies, it's not a step he's ready to take. For what precipitates that change in view hasn't happened yet. So his subversions are more seen being done with respect to a man that's spitefully stealing from him his redemption, over doing that to his home.
Then we come to The Fortune Teller, another episode I really don't like.
It's more based on my general dislike of prophecy and predestination-driven narratives, and this old crone that tells them what their future is going to be based on nothing at all. I hate these kind of spinsters that make people's actions not of their own culmination of choices, but fated to happen no matter what, based on exceedingly trivial predictions that con people into really believing they see the future. Yes, Aang is fated to face Ozai, but not because it's pre-written.
Though, with respect to it being a TV series, yeah it is. I'm saying within the world itself, it's not pre-written to happen. But he will face Ozai, as not doing so will cause more people to be harmed. And he already feels guilty about running away before, after seeing all that has caused.
However, these kinds of people operated off of setting things in stone and deceiving others, whereas people who really do have the gift of that knowledge or do such conning responsibly use it to spur people to make choices informed by what they see, that they can change their fate or seek the predicted path if they are consciously aware of it. It's that element of the character I liked about Miyuki Tezuka and Ryuki, after all. That he subverted this as best he could, even if him acting that out screwed the series over by saving the asshole that kept the damn war going to refute a prediction. If she ever once said during this something to the effect of, "I could only see the ending, not the journey, it's up to you to make it happen," then I really wouldn't have a problem with this, as it's still preserving that ultimate choice and emphasis that one has to work to achieve what they desire. As oftentimes when one is told what will happen, There are those who will instead miss that opportunity to achieve it because they believe it will occur regardless of what they do. Such an example shown more grandly in how she put other people's lives in danger with her predictions that an erupting volcano would not harm the town, when that only comes to pass because of people who don't believe in her take actions to save the idiots that did nothing to get out of danger because of her prediction. That is vastly irresponsible, and her other predictions more of the same. And she just fucking gets away with it. And it's played for laughs that Sokka can't prove her wrong. We can't change our fate, so we'll do nothing. Other people do things that change the fate we were wrong about? I'll take credit for being right all along!
Nope, stop talking, go to jail.
I'm sorry, I really hate this episode. It's the only one I cannot sit through, and I can't be the only one that thinks that. But sadly, it's a bit less skippable, as it does move forward the romance subplot between Aang and Katara, as they're once more duped by her shtick. Kinda puts the whole jet mess in better context if this is a repeated element, but still it's contradictory to what's shown of their characters most of the time.
As the group continues to travel, the gang encounter Bato, a member of their tribe that left on a fleet with their father years before, who'd been recovering from injuries, and tells them of the war, while reminding the siblings of the home they left, which results in Aang feeling left out. She's never seen this side of them. Coupled with word of them being able to meet their father after years apart, and Aang being alone in the world without them around, when he ends up intercepting the map that would lead them to their father, he hides it from them. It's only after Bato takes the group through a ceremonial rite does he reveal it, the siblings' trust broken with the act, and almost caused what he was so afraid of in the first place. Zuko, meanwhile, gains the assistance of a bounty hunter and her tracking beast, using Katara's necklace as a means of finding them through scent.
Yeah, that doesn't work that way. Animals track scents left by us being places, but can't find it out of the blue, which this beast does. Yes, I know it's a fantasy realm, but the best fantasies are grounded in reality.
But the hunt, along with wisdom from Bato, leads to their reconciliation, and the retrieval of Katara's necklace.
And this is why you should always respect the nature of flame. Burn things! And you get burned.
The deserter, however, shows the problem of learning the elements out of order in the Avatar cycle. Because, obviously, since they've been traveling through the Earth Kingdom, they could have picked up an Earthbender at any time. But with Firebenders being the enemy, they wouldn't exactly have a good chance to obtain someone who could teach them. Thus, why a defector they encounter would be their best shot, even against the man's wishes. But the reason it's a bad idea is an issue of control and affinity. Without learning the other elements first, things can go wild, as one element can amplify the other. And with fire, it's something that necessitates restraint, which air and water requires less of, and earth would teach the force needed for dominion over the flame, which prepares one that learns all disciplines properly for the task. It's something the man tries to infer, but Aang's own impatience leads to the fire going rampant, injuring Katara in the process. While Aang's scared straight and abandons learning fire for the moment, it's not all negatives, as from this, Katara learns that waterbenders can use water to heal. We're finally shown that the group's nearing their destination as they hear stories of those that fly, and investigate the Northern Air Temple, only to find the inhabitants there had pretty extensively remodeled the place, to Aang's disgust. This was his people's home, and now it's overrun with pipes and those that appear to disrespect what was once here.
This is supposed to be the history of my people.
It's a pretty obvious allegory for progress that forgets the history it's built upon, but it helps these are just people displaced and trying to build a life here, and taking inspiration from what was found abandoned. The Fire Nation, however, has only left the place alone thanks to the actions of the head of the community, an inventor, who was commissioned to use the inspired developments to give them an advantageous technological advancement. So when they are refused, we get a lengthy battle that shows how the Fire Nation likely first got to locations that before could only be reached by airbenders.
It is still kind of a plot hole, however, as much of the Fire Nation's technological development has been in the past century. So it's unlikely they would have been able to field the mass number of troops like they did here. And with far more benders able to defend themselves, I want to say timeline-wise, the extermination of the airbenders had to likely have happened during the last time the comet came over the world. But the show never states that completely to my knowledge.
Well, Aang ultimately decides to let them stay, and make something new of the region for themselves. Unfortunately, the battle does provide the Fire Nation with a new resource we see them later reverse develop, a new model of airship with controllable altitude, which is salvaged after the fact. And, at last, the group reaches the Northern Water Tribe and their masters, so Aang and Katara can finally be properly trained in waterbending. Only one problem. They don't train women how to fight, to the point that when they try to go around them and have Aang pass on what he's taught, it almost results in said teacher, Pakku, kicking them out.
Which is stupid. None of the other bending factions are ever shown performing this kind of stint. If you can bend, you'll learn the same as everyone else. But with the Northern Tribe, if you're a woman that can bend, you're stuck being a healer. Even though when Katara's first shown using that ability, it's said that only a small number of waterbenders can even do that. So, what the hell? Do female waterbenders that can't heal in their tribe just not get trained at all? It's never once given a satisfactory reason for this outside of tradition.
I mean, it feels really out of freaking place, especially since they very quickly quashed that plot thread with Sokka via the Kyoshi Warriors at the beginning of the series. To bring it back up after 14 episodes have passed and not treated Katara as any different than anyone else solely because of her gender, and Pakku really doesn't have a good reason behind it either, and such a tradition is pretty quickly thrown out once Katara shows him how advanced she already is simply from being self-taught. Let's scroll from earlier in the season, training with Aang, and confidence in her abilities.
The fight Katara's put through to show she's more than worthy to learn is certainly awesome, but I feel instead of going the have to provide a victory for progressive feminism in a world that already seems to have things pretty balanced route, it would have worked better if the guy was more dismissive of her abilities. Then again, the two polar water tribes are more steeped in insular tradition than everybody else on the planet.
I guess it didn't help that Pakku is regularly shown as a patronizing dick, and was the former fiancé of Katara's grandmother via an arranged marriage, a presumption of the tradition strangling them why she may have left.
So it makes sense why she left for the South Pole then, where she would get wrapped up in their traditions of domestic living. I really don't get this.
The subplots more carry it for me, with Sokka growing close to Princess Yue, the pair sharing a mutual attraction in spite that she too suffers under an arranged marriage, the fiancé in the matter seen in the following episode, and yes, much like Pakku, the guy is a self-centered jackass. Unlike Pakku, however, who actually did care for Katara's grandmother, he sees Yue as less of a person and more of a status symbol, and in it for the perks. All the while Zhao sets up a plan to murder Zuko and get him out of the way of his efforts to capture Aang in a Siege of the North, which don't go to plan in the two-part season finale, the Siege of the North.
I swear I'm not doing that on purpose.
As Katara quickly advances faster than any student Pakku's seen, Sokka's attempt to take Yui on a date reveals to the tribe that the Fire Nation ships are coming, helping that the amount of soot that comes off their ships is ridiculous. They prepare for the invasion. Aang resolved to not let what happened to his home happen here, making a significant impact in the early stages of the siege, but there are simply too many. As night falls on the siege, they pull back, for waterbenders are apparently stronger at night, especially in the presence of a full moon. This allows Zuko to sneak into the facility, while Aang attempts to contact the spirits of the moon and ocean, who govern the power of the waterbenders, to ask them for help in winning the battle, Yui leading them to a sacred shrine to make the attempt, where a pair of fish that embodies their spirits reside. As he manages to cross over, Zuko arrives, the resulting battle a challenge of Katara's development, and in a battle of water and fire, it's only Zuko's greater battle experience that allows him to eventually overcome Katara and take Aang while his spirit is elsewhere. However, Zhao has bigger plans than just destroying the city, as is realized when Aang discovers the spirits' identities. Because the spirits here possess bodies and are responsible for waterbender's powers, Zhao plans to kill a spirit to permanently depower them, having learned their identity from a library seen the following season, and succeeds in killing the moon spirit, which is all kinds of catastrophically bad. Much of the world is maintained by the presence and existence of spirits, so removing them?
You have no idea what kind of chaos that would unleash on the world.
Such as? Kind of need to justify this more than just removing waterbending and the moon.
Still, Iroh knows the kinds of bad things that would result from this, and the madness that's overcome Zhao in his lust for prestige and power, siding with them against him in the conflict as, no matter their allegiances, the balance must be maintained for the good of all. But Zhao's victory is ironically turned into a defeat by his screwing with the spirits, because the ocean is pissed, possesses Aang and forces him into his full-on Avatar state, and single-handedly destroys the Fire Nation forces. Now, witness the firepower of this fully armed and operational spirit fish! However, Yui has the way to fix things, as due to a connection forged not long after her birth, a piece of it resides within her. Thus, she gives that piece of her spirit back and becomes one with the moon, her essence living on, and parting ways with Sokka. As Zuko ended up stalling Zhao from escaping, he is claimed by the ocean spirit's vengeance, but even with all he's done, Zuko still tries to save him to the last moment.
Take my hand!
In the aftermath of the battle, Pakku recognizes Katara's ability and titles her a master, asking her to finish Aang's training, while Iroh and Zuko leave the land, Zuko's anger having burned itself out from all of the time he's kept it burning. The two are alone in the world, and before they decide what to do, it's finally time to rest. Though that rest for both factions will not be long, for word has already reached Ozai, who charges his daughter, Azula, to continue the campaign.
Huh, didn't think I could do it, but 20 episodes talked about in under an hour! Avatar Book 1 is perfectly fine, though I think you're all getting the point of why I rarely talk about American stuff. I didn't have that much to say.
Because most of it has been said before by others, so I'm keeping it brief into the importance of each episode. Each one mostly plays their part in progression, but it's harm that we're not really given a scope of the world or how they're headed places outside of the 4 beginning episodes and the 4 ending episodes. Continuity more maintained in the side plots with Zuko, Iroh, and Zhao. A lot of terms are dropped, most of which are given context for, others we'll see pulled off later, and it does keep a consistent direction. But as they've not fully set the characters into their roles yet, there's time for new dynamics to form and further growth in the following season's character arcs.
There also seems to be an issue with foreshadowing and laying the groundwork for later moments quite often. The dialogue still flows naturally, but a lot of it at times feels as if it were an afterthought addendum to the lore. Take the thing with Yui bearing the part of the moon spirit at the end of the season. It was set up as an element and an obvious resolution to Zhao killing it, but only happens a few minutes before such actually occurs. If it was instead told as a bit of the bonding between her and Sokka, it'd give more time to that relationship and the tragic romance of it, which, honestly, in and of itself, felt a bit rushed.
The thing is, though, while much of that establishment comes only as it's relevant, much of it ends up brought up and paid off in later parts of the story. While I hadn't seen the series in years, I remembered much of the events such setups led to later, so there's certainly more there to appreciate on the rewatch than the first time around, and remains quite memorable. But of the 3 seasons, Water is probably the weakest of the 3 overall, though elements of the following books can end up more polarizing in opinion.
In 2 weeks, we will pick up where Book 1 left off, with Book 2, Earth, and the introduction of the blind bandit herself, Toph. What? Toph is awesome.